Why did the devil use soul ties? Because they work. The relationships we can have with people will actually detour our purpose. So much so that we see it 3 times in the life of Jesus. Isn't that crazy? Sneaky, sneaky devil and his soul ties. Bottom line regarding soul ties, because this is not our seminar teaching on it. People will hold you back. People you love can hold you back. Question for contemplation. Who do you have a soul tie with? Just to contemplate. This is not an in-your-face question. We're sisters in the body of Christ. Who do you have a soul tie with? All right, number 2. Step 2. You must forsake everything to include anyone you have soul ties to. Let's just call it for what it is. You must forsake everything. And this includes forsaking everyone. Now, I don't have time. I mean, I wanted, this teaching was going to be about 1,000 minutes long, longer than we are going to allow it to be. But you can imagine how much fun I was having with this topic. Let's look at the word forsake so that we can understand what this word actually means. The word forsake, to abandon someone or something. God's asking us to forsake everyone and everything. All right? So we understand it's not just a person. What does that mean? It means to abandon, to desert, to leave behind, and to turn your back on? Wait, what? It means to reject, disown, discard. Wow. That's what the term forsake means. That's pretty darn scary. So God is asking us to disown everything, leave behind everything, desert and abandon everything, reject and give up everything. That sounds pretty intense. But didn't I already share with you that if we are going to do what God has called us to do, it is going to cost us a lot? There's a cost. There's a cost to actually finding our purpose and fulfilling it, and there's a cost to not. There are consequences and results to finding our purpose, and there are consequences to not. Both have consequences. Both have a cost. Best example to illustrate forsaking was when God forsook his only begotten son and abandoned him and rejected him and turned his back on him and disowned him. In that time when all of judgment, God's judgment and all of his wrath was on his son, and all of the sin of the entire world was on his son, God turned and disowned him in that moment as his son. Because when he saw his son, he saw him as sin. Your sin and my sin. Can you imagine that? Do you know that that's why Jesus was grieved? He wasn't grieved for any of the material things, for the fact that he even left his kingdom. He was grieved because he knew his father was going to forsake him. That's pretty intense. So if God, by his example through Jesus, forsook his only son, rejected him, turned away from him, abandoned him, his holy, perfect, and righteous son who did nothing. And I know that's pretty drastic. Then are we going to be okay when God calls us to forsake someone or something in order to fulfill our purpose? He's not going to ask us just to do it for nothing. He's not going to pull an Isaac and Abraham on us. That was Old Testament. He's not going to test us like that, to that level. He's not going to have us go take our child up, and make a sacrifice, put him on the altar, okay? So we don't have to worry about that. Most of us would have failed that test. I would have failed that test, okay? So he's not going to ask us to do that. But there are going to be some things that God is going to call you and I to do very specifically that is going to require some things on our end. And it's going to include people that we love, like our husband, like our children, like our church. Now, let me just put this disclaimer here again. I'm not saying God's going to ask you to leave your husband. Forsake doesn't just mean to leave physically, to leave a relationship. I asked the Lord one day, I said, Lord, you turned your back on your mother, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, everything else. I said, forsake, can you explain that a little bit more to me? And he basically said, daughter, in my heart, never had an audible conversation with the Lord. I want you to forsake the opinions of other people, what they think of you. And I want you to focus on what I think of you. He didn't ask me to leave my mother. He didn't tell me to divorce Ryan. He said to divorce their thoughts and their opinions about me and what God had called me to do. Not to marriage divorce Ryan, to divorce his opinion over what God had called me to do. That's forsaking. Forsaking is not caring what other people think. Forsaking is not being a David. Forsaking is that we are made in the image of Christ, and Christ is our example. And we are going to have to forsake the opinions of every single person we care about, or we are not going to be entrusted with our purpose. Got that? Forsake doesn't mean I argue with my husband. Oh, yeah, well, you don't know what God's called me to do, and the heck with that. That doesn't mean that. But it certainly means if my husband's going to cause me to compromise, sin, become lazy, complacent, apathetic, comfortable with what God's called me to do, I'm going to have to stand up to him. That's what that means. Oh, in addition to, we might have to physically forsake people we love. Relatives, friends, a church, a ministry, our favorite YouTube channel. God is going to convict us to start forsaking. Most people didn't want to forsake something or someone, especially the something. They didn't want to forsake all the luxuries of this world, all the things they were entitled to, and because they didn't, guess what they ended up getting in their arm? ×3. God might ask us to forsake some things. He might ask you to forsake, give up, abandon some money, some of your worldly dreams, some of your worldly plans. Are we going to take that challenge to do what he's called us to do? I will say today, yes, but it wasn't easy. It took me 14 years to get to the point where I can actually look him in the eye and say, yes, Lord, I'll forsake everything.